I joined Goldman Sachs, worked in the mergers and acquisitions department, and came to discover that many companies, in this case technology companies, were on the precipice of engaging in the utilization of computing technologies. These computing technologies were being proliferated principally because there was access to low cost compute. In that case, Moore's law had kicked in. They were able to distribute on-premise compute systems. But the thing that those systems actually didn't have a lot of course, was software. That at the time, originally introduced, they were solutions, and the software, the hardware, the firmware were all pretty much integrated and managed by a team. But ultimately, there was a separation of the hardware and the software. And I'll call it, most of the value really inured to the benefit of the software and the software providers. And I thought, in evaluating this, that the value in the enterprise world of software, this again business, was going to inure much more to the benefit of these software providers than consumers. Consumers can be fickle about what they buy and not buy, but in businesses, you make very studied decisions on what's going to create a long-term return to the stakeholders, the shareholders of those businesses. And so enterprise software, again, continues to be the most productive tool introduced in our business economy over the last 50 years. And businesses, enterprises, are typically, found that their next best dollar purchase is to buy more software to enable their employees or their business operations to operate much more productively, much more efficiently. And as a result of that, I felt that would be a good place to start investing capital. And that's when I started Vista, really focused on doing buyouts and enterprise software, focused on these mission critical, business critical business solutions that now have proliferated globally. So, that's how the connection and the tie come together.
Well, you mentioned your time with Goldman back in I think it was in the mid 90s or so, where you advised IBM and eBay and Apple and other tech giants on mergers and acquisitions. How do you remember that period?
Mhm. Yeah. It was a wonderful period of, and I'm going to say this, discovery. Discovery about the power and utilization of A, software on the one hand, and B, compute on the other. We were all starting to become comfortable with these computer devices that would at one point show up on our desk. And, the early days, of course, they'd be used for simple things like word processing. And then ultimately you started to see the introduction of these spreadsheets, which became a major utility. And I think, at the early days, there were five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10 different spreadsheet providers. Some of which you remember, Lotus and VisiCalc and Multiplan and all those. But one that emerged ultimately was at that time Excel. Excel, because of the way they packaged the product with the operating systems, because operating systems were part of that new technology to come in, and how do you actually operate the silicon and make these systems work. And so there were useful applications that were being utilized, some in word processing areas, and you remember the word perfects in Word, and then there were spreadsheets. And ultimately, it was those spreadsheets that started to create a massive amount of productivity. Work that took, in some cases, months to prepare could now be done in a matter of seconds. And there, of course, had to be some training of employees. But once that happened, the productivity actually started to accelerate pretty dramatically.